Hi, welcome back to the Help video series for BA 342. In this series of videos, we're working through the queries that we've done in class because, as we've said before, we're unable to record due to room restrictions in the big lecture hall. So we're recording these videos for you to review for your exam, for your project, or at your leisure for any other purpose. And we hope that by reviewing these videos, you get a better grasp of the logic behind what we're trying to accomplish when we walk through our step-by-step in-class activities. So for this video, we're going to be working on the class activities and the solutions from the in-class activities for the week of 10-8. So let's move forward in this video and talk about the first query. Before we start, I want to point out that there are reasons that we're doing these queries. So we're trying to build your logic. And logic is what is going to differentiate you in the marketplace. The way that you understand the way data works and the way that you understand how databases work are what's going to differentiate you. As we've talked about before, we're using Access as a tool to practice these logical steps because it's free to you as a UT student. And it's a simple query by example grid, which keeps you from having to learn all the syntax behind SQL. So while Access is a great tool, it is likely not the one that you're going to be using in the marketplace. So we want to make sure that we understand the logic that goes into building these queries, not just that we can jump into Access and create these queries for an exam or for a project or for anything like that. We need to be able to understand the logic behind them, and that's what's going to help differentiate us. So let's start with what seems like a very simple activity. This activity asks us to design a query that displays the shipper ID and the total freight charges per shipper. If we just dive into Access, likely we're going to end up in the wrong place. So I would like to walk through the steps of how we should logically think about going through and getting the answer to this. Let's start by looking at a graphic that displays our tables. As you've heard in class, and as you likely have established for yourself, this slide is your best friend. It is a map of how all the tables in our BA 342 database intersect and interlink and how they're connected to each other with these primary and foreign keys. If you just dive into Access and you don't bother to take a look at this grid, you're likely going to end up with extra tables to perform this query. So I highly recommend that you spend time looking at this and building your logic with pencil and paper or out in your brain before you ever open Access. Likely, if you were to just open Access and start clicking around, your first instinct for this query of display the shipper ID and the total freight charges per shipper would be to go to the shippers table. Here in the shippers table, you can find the shipper ID, which is the first part of your query. But as you'll notice, there is nothing in the shippers table with regard to freight charges. So if this happens to you and you're trying to logically think through what needs to happen next, you follow the lines away from the shipper table to see what it relates to, and we see that the shipper table is directly related to the sales table. Well, the sales table has a lot of stuff in it, and we look down through this list until we find shipper ID, which we've already established that we need. The next field is freight charges. I point this out to just show you that we only need one table because both our shipper ID and our freight charges are housed in this table, so we don't need to link to the shipper table at all. Now, will Access work if we do? It absolutely will in this particular case, but as you've seen in many of your queries, if you have extra tables or things that you don't link to, or you try to link to too many things, Access is going to work its way into circles and likely break on you. So looking at this grid is a great first step to figure out what tables do I need. And remember, ultimately, we're going back to what we learned before exam 1 with query logic, and we're trying to come up with our select, from, and our where. And our select being the fields that we need to display. In this case, we need shipper ID and total freight charges. Our from being the table that we need to get them from, in this case, the sales table. And our where, which would limit our criteria. We don't have one of those in this case because we need the total sales, so we don't need a where in this particular case. But if we did, that would be our criteria logic, and we'll get to that in just a little bit or in another video. So let's get started. Let's open Access. And when you open Access, we're going to go up to the Create tab, and we're going to create a new query. As you can see right now, I have a blank database, and I recommend that you start with a blank database several times as you go through this class. It's going to test your logic and test how well you're learning it. Because when your professor does it, when I do it on this help video, when other people do it and show you, it always looks easier than it actually is. So I highly recommend that you practice mostly with an empty database to start, but I digress. So on this Create tab, we're going to go to this Query Design button. You're welcome to try and use the Query Wizard, but we're not going to teach that in this class. So we will go to our Query Design, and we've decided that we just need the sales table. So I'm going to double click on the sales table, and you'll see it appears in the background. You can also single click on it and click Add. Or if you lose this box, you can always go over here and drag it out. And however you need to get it into your query grid in your design view is fine. So I'm going to expand this so we can see a little more of the fields in this table, and then we'll get to work. Our query asks for the shipper ID and the total freight charges per shipper. So we'll start with shipper ID, and you can double click it and it will appear down below here in this grid. Oops, I forgot to do something. Let's always remember to click on our totals row and have it appear at the beginning, because it creates these group bys and gives us a place for our wheres and our sums and our counts. And so it's just best practice to click on it before you get started, and so it always appears. So we'll start with shipper ID, and then we need a total of the freight charges. So click on freight charges, and then you'll see if we run this query now, we have a list of the shipper ID with shipper number 1 here, and each individual freight charge. Well, as you know from class and from many other queries that we've done, to get them all to come together, we simply need to select sum here for the freight charges. And then we can run it again, and you can see it gives us what we would like. It gives us the 3 shippers and the total sum of their freight charges. The only thing left here that is a little strange is this title here, and as you know, we can always rename a field. So we go down here and we can call this total freight charges, and make sure that we put a colon, and anything in front of the colon is what this new column heading is going to say. It's called an alias that renames this. As you can see, this is already formatted as currency, but if it weren't, we would want to make sure that we formatted it as currency. So let's close this. It says, do you want to save the changes? And of course we do. And we will call this total freight per shipper. Total freight per shipper, and we'll click OK. And then you'll see it appears down here in our lovely All Access Objects navigation pane. So let's go back to, as you can see, if you go back to the slides and you follow along, the solutions are here. But again, I'm trying to walk you through and make sure that you understand what's happening. So our next query says, please display a category ID and the average list price per category. So again, I recommend that you go to this grid of all of your tables and you try to find the table that has both the category ID and the list price in it. So if I'm thinking logically about categories and I'm thinking the average price per category, I know, because I've worked with this database for so long, that that's going to be in the product table. So I'm going to have the category ID and I'm going to have the unit list price both in the product table. But it's possible that if you were just in Access again, you would pull the categories table and end up with fields that just wouldn't work for you. Or you would have these two tables that you would have to link together. But let's work on just this other simple query. Again, this is just a one table query, so it's not really testing you yet. So let's go to Query Design and create a new query, and we're going to create it with this products table. We'll close this. And so we have the product table where we need to display the category ID and the average list price per category. So category ID, unit list price. And what we need to do here is just get an average of the list price. And I forgot again, see? So this totals row I need to group by category ID because I do want the average per category ID. And then instead of sum this time, I will select average. And then we'll run this and see what we get. And we think, oh, that's beautiful. There are 31 rows, just like there are 31 categories. So I'm good, except again, I have these column headers that just aren't what I want. So I can click back over here, give this an alias, call it average price, and a colon, so that I can retitle my things, and off we go. Now, if we wanted to display the category name in this query as well, we can no longer do that without the categories table. So, for example, and this is not in your solution on your slides, but just for example, if I wanted to display the category name, what I would do is I would add the categories table, and you'll see I just go over here and drag it onto the grid. And I need to join these tables by category ID. And then I can just add the category name. Now, the category name appears over here, but there are ways that you can move it. Like you can delete this row, or you can insert a row, or you can just turn it black. And then once this whole column is black, you hover over it until you get this white arrow, and you can grab it and drag it and move it over here. So now I will say that this is probably more useful than just the category ID. But again, your boss just asked for the category ID and the average price. But I'm just showing you how you could, after the fact, add a category name if you so desire. You could just link those tables in together. So we're going to close this, and we're going to call it average price per category. Do we want to save? Of course we do. We don't do things that we don't want to save. Average price per category, and then click OK. Let's take a look at our next query that we would like to do for this. This is our last query in this activity, I believe. So let's see. Design a query that displays the employee ID and the gross sales of the employee for the year 2016 based on the end user input of employee ID. A challenge: include employee first name and last name. So we'll do it with the challenge because why not? It's a help video. So we'll do it with the challenge. So we need to take a note of what we need. So we'll move to this slide that I've been telling you that we needed to do. So in this question, our boss has said we need employee ID, employee first name, employee last name, and gross sales of the employee for the year 2016. So we need to select employee ID, employee first name, employee last name, and we need to do a calculation with sales. So in order to get employee first name and employee last name, I've got to have this employee table. And in order to get the gross sales, I'm not asking you to remember this formula, but I will give it to you in a second. But the gross sales, I'm going to need sales price and quantity. So I'm going to need the sales lines table and the employees table because I need to select employee ID, employee last name, employee first name, and then I need to calculate the total sales. So I need all of these. There's another thing that I need. I need this sales table in the middle because I have to connect these two tables together, sales lines and employees. But there's another part of this query that tells me that I need the sales table as well. And that is, it wants me to just do the gross sales for the year 2016. You'll notice there are no dates in the employee table, and there are no dates in the sales lines table, but there is a date that I need in the sales table, and that's the ship date. The reason that I need the ship date is because that's when the sale actually occurs. So this goes back to what we studied in Module 1 for the first exam, where we talked about the order to cash process and when the sale actually occurs. A sale actually occurs when we deliver our goods and services, so in this case, the ship date. So that's just a lesson in how this all ties together. But let's switch over to Access and get going on this query. So again, let's go to the Create tab and click Query Design. And we've said that we need the Employees table, the Sales table, and the Sales Lines table. So we'll select those. And then try to show you the fields that are in these. This isn't necessary, it's just a personal preference. But the first thing that we need to do, we're going to click this totals row and make it appear down there. But the very first thing that we need to do logically is join these tables together. So I'll take employee ID and I'll drag it to employee ID, and I'll take sales invoice ID, drag it to sales invoice ID, and now my tables are joined together. This allows Access to give me where these tables intersect and create the right amount of data from them. So let's get going. I need employee ID. Because I'm doing the challenge, I need employee first name, I need employee last name, I need to calculate the total sales. So there are several ways that I can do that. One of them is with the builder. I can also just hard key it down here, but I won't do the syntax for you this time. This time I'll show you how to use the builder. So you click in the field where you would like gross sales to be, go up here and click builder. And we're going to find our sales lines table within this BA342 database. So we'll find sales lines, and we need gross sales. So gross sales, just as a reminder, is sales price per times quantity sold. Has nothing to do with the discount, because the discount would be net sales. And then, as always, it gives me this weird expression 1. So I'm going to put total gross sales, and as usual, I know that I need to sum these because I need them to be a total for each employee. So as you'll see, you'll have group by employee ID, group by employee first name, group by employee last name, which I can give these cool aliases so they don't look weird. Not that this is affecting what happens, but will make my output prettier. And so grouping by all of these things is not a problem because they all represent the same employee. So these multiple group bys aren't going to mess you up. But remember, Access reads from left to right. And so if I was trying to then group by total gross sales, it won't do that because that doesn't make sense. And it wants to group by the last thing that you told it. So just bear that in mind. And the last part of the query is that we only want things that happened in 2016. So in order to limit what happened to only 2016, I have to use a date field because I can't put a parameter of a date on something that's not a date. So for ship date, I want to tell it that I want all of the ship dates between, remember this, between 1/1/2016 and 12/31/2016. If I don't put the hashtags on here, Access will do it for me. So I recommend that you don't start putting the hashtags, because if you start and you put 1, it won't finish for you. So I recommend that you just don't put any and just type the dates in there. But remember, between January 1st and December 31st, 2016. So now I've told you before about these group bys, and Access reads from left to right, and it says group by employee ID, group by first name, group by last name, and then sum this number together, and then group by ship date. So if I run this right now, what Access is doing is it's grouping by this ship date, because it's the last thing that I told it to group by. And so it doesn't understand that, no, that's my criteria. I don't want you to group by that. I want you to group by employee ID. I told you that already. Access doesn't understand. The computer only remembers the last thing that you told it. So we need to change this group by to something. Well, we have a criteria, and if you go back to Module 1 and you remember, I keep saying these words of select, from, and where. So we select the fields that we need from the tables that they're in, where we will have our limiting criteria. And you'll notice if you click in this box, where is available to us. Now, I can't check this box if I use it just as a criteria, but I don't need to show that, so it doesn't matter. And so then it will sum by employee and give me the total gross sales. This is a little bit difficult if you get confused on the where and the group by. But this is the list that would occur if you wanted the entire list. But if you go back and you read our prompt, it says, let's see, it says, I want all of these things that we've got. So employee ID, gross sales of employee based on the end user input of employee ID. Well, I missed that part. So that's a parameter. And in order to make a parameter, we want the end user to enter just the employee ID for what they want. So we've talked about this before, but to make a parameter, you insert a square bracket, which tells Access one of two things. Either I'm going to give you directions or I'm going to give you a field name. In this case, I'm going to give you directions, so I don't want to type my field name because then Access is going to be very confused about what I want. But I'm going to say, please enter, if I can type, enter employee ID. And then I'm going to close my square bracket. If I have good grammar, I'm going to put a colon and then close my square bracket. But then when I run this, what's going to happen is I'm going to get this pop-up box that says what I put in those square brackets. Please enter employee ID. I'll enter employee number 5, and I will get Stephen Buchanan with his $61,000. I hope this has helped you through the activities for this week, and I'll be back with other videos to help you. But before we do, real quick, we'll say gross sales by employee. And again, if you have other questions, just keep practicing. The best thing that you can do is to make Access break and to do something wrong as you prepare and you go through this, because it's going to help your logic more than anything else. And as you continue to study and continue to work, please remember this slide and how it helps you with your logic. Keep watching, and I'll talk to you again in later videos.